Right, so now we're going to bring our keyboard right here into Keyshot. Okay. Now there is a button, so like if you have Fusion and Keyshot, there's a plugin you can get, which is the rendering Keyshot bridge. And if I were to click this, it would actually send everything to that. But I want you to see both ways in case your button isn't there. So I'm going to go here and export. There's a bunch of different formats that we could use to export. We'll talk about these in class. I'm going to go to Step. We've been saving this to the cloud so far. So when we save this, this is actually going to our Autodesk account. I'm going to go and call this Keyboard Export. I'm going to go to my dots here. Here's my keyboard. I'm going to make a new folder called Scenes. And I'm going to put my step file into that folder and export it. Okay, so it's exported. Now I'm going to go to my Keyshot. I'm going to go to Import. And then I'm going to find that file. Okay, so there's that step file. You will get a bunch of options when you try to bring stuff in, asking, do you want to bring this in as a new model or default? Right now it's just obviously the same thing. Center the geometry, snap it to the ground, what's your up orientation, your tessellation quality, and so on. Everything is fine by default. Once we actually import it, we may need to come back and kind of adjust some of our stuff. Probably not, because this is a pretty simple scene, but you may need to at some points. I'm going to hit import. This is bringing everything in. You will notice that this is standing vertically. It's not laying down like it was inside of Fusion. Fusion uses Z up as the up direction, and Keyshot uses Y up. Okay, so I'm going to go to my scene here. I'm going to click on my keyboard export. I'm going to go down to position. Okay, now if these aren't here, they're at the bottom. Library, project. I don't need animation on at the moment. So library and project, this is the library, this is the project, okay? I'm going to go to my rotation and put -90 in the X direction. This should rotate it. There it is. I don't know why it jumped up there. And then I'm going to hit snap to ground, and then it should snap it to the ground, okay? Now, the controls for moving around, I'm going to use a left mouse button to rotate, the middle mouse button to pan, and then the scroll wheel to zoom. Okay, so there we go. Okay, now my rotate feels like it's a little bit off. Let's go here to snap to ground. Oh, center. There we go. Cool. So now it's actually centered in the scene. All right, good. So now we brought this in, and if we come over here, we should be able to open this up, and you'll see that none of our grouping stuff functions. Okay. If I go to, I'm just going to go to a new Keyshot file here. I'm going to jump back to Fusion. I'm going to click on this. Make sure I click bodies. Go to Fusion. This is receiving data, so this is actually sending my model from Fusion into Keyshot. This is a great way to do it because obviously we don't have to export and then import and then look, it already comes in the right direction. And I can make sure I hit center. That's the one I'll need to hit. Another reason I need to hit center is because our model, if you remember when we brought it in, the curves were initially, the sketch was like off center. Okay, so it was like the actual center of the thing is like over here somewhere. That's the only reason I did that. This doesn't matter for what we're doing. Okay, now this one will keep at least the names of these. So that one says keyboard base because we called it keyboard base. And then here's our body 234. And then here are all of our keys. Okay, so it's very similar to what we would get, right? Just by clicking on these, we can see what each one's going to select. If we click on the top one, it might look like it's grabbing just the outside because these look very similar, but it's grabbing like everything as a group. Okay, so first thing I want to do is I want to go to my materials and just start assigning base materials to the pieces. So on the left side here, I'm going to go to material, I'm going to try to pick what color I want for this base. Okay, I'm going to have 3 basic colors. The base, these turning knobs will have one color, and then the keys will have another color. So I'm going to go to this, and you could look through these if you want. Stick to something that looks realistic. So like fabric, there's no reason we would have like this fabric as a material on there. Or wood, we probably wouldn't have like a wood texture on the keys. You know, that doesn't really make sense. It seems kind of silly. So I'm going to stick with like hard plastic. So I'm going to go to hard, shiny plastic, actually rough plastic, and I'm going to say the outside is going to be rough plastic. So I'm going to take this and drag it onto that. Now you'll see that it assigns it to everything. Okay, so when I drag this onto here, it's going to assign it to everything. But if I come over here and I drag it just to this, it'll only assign it to that one. Okay. Then I'm going to go to these 3. I'm going to go to a rubber material. And just this regular rubber material, I'm going to make sure I've selected all 3 of these. These are my knobs. I'm going to drag this onto my knobs. And then the keys, I'm going to go with a shiny black plastic. So I'm going to go back up to my plastics again, shiny hard black plastic, and drag this onto the keys. Okay, so now if I deselect, there we go, and I spin around, you can see how I have these 3 different materials on here. Shiny black plastic, more of a rubbery material, and then this rough black plastic. Okay, now it's taking a second, it's thinking. I'm going to tell it to use my GPU instead of my CPU, and that should hopefully make it go a little bit smoother. Now, if I double click one of these, it'll bring up the material for it. So if I wanted to change the diffuse, which is the color, I could change that diffuse. Okay, now I don't want to go like red or anything, but like I may want to lighten that black a little bit to more of a gray. That's a possibility. It's hard to get it here because like we're almost there. But here is like a lot easier to tone that. Okay. Now before I get too in the depths of what I'm doing here, I'm going to go over to my environment, and I'm going to try to find another nice environment. Okay. So each one of these tabs is like different stuff you can add to this. So if you don't like this white background, let's say, you could drag this into it, and now your keyboard will be, you know, floating in space here. Right? These are not for everything. This is not for a keyboard, but like a studio backdrop, I may want to put my keyboard on a studio backdrop. Now it's not animated, so if I'm just doing a still, that works. If I'm doing an animation, it doesn't work. Here's another studio backdrop. Okay? And if I want to change the environment lighting, that's where I could use this. Okay? So I'm going to do some settings over here in my... I always forget which one it's under. Oh, right there. Yep. Under environment, under settings, I don't want a black backplate image. I want a color. And I'm going to pull this color into like the darker realm here, like this dark black, right? It's not black, but it's like dark gray. That's cool. Let me make sure this is still centered here. Forward. Position, center, okay. My rotate was just, feels a little bit off still, but I guess it's fine. There it goes. Okay. I'm going to go to, that's just the background is at black now. So I'm going to go to the environments here on the left, and then if I drag this into the scene, this will change the lighting. So now you can see how that's giving us this more harsher, reflective color right here. So for some instances, that might be exactly what we want. Drag this in there. Maybe that's what we want. Okay. And sometimes you may not show it with the line like there, but you may have it like this, or you may have it like that. Okay. Usually if you have this line in here, you're really trying to show like the screen glossiness, cleanliness of it. Okay. This one's nice. It has a little bit more softness to it. Let's try this one. Okay, the idea here is we're trying to find something that has some nice lighting to the piece. Okay. Even something like this could add some nice detail, like it's in an actual environment. Add some color splashes. It doesn't really make sense to have the trees, right? Usually we'd want to go with one of these things like this, right? Now that's way too glossy for these. We'll adjust that. But again, just kind of going through and just seeing what these other ones do to the piece. That's the idea with this. Okay, so I like the studio backdrop here. I think that looks pretty decent. I am going to double click these because I want to take their roughness up a bit. There we go. So you see how that, like, crisp, soft. Okay. So that looks pretty good there. Now, we may want to adjust it. Let's say we wanted to shoot our stuff from this angle, but we're not really getting enough lighting. We can go to the environment, and on the settings for this, we can go to rotation, and we can rotate this around to find the right angle for what that's going to look like to make it look, you know, much nicer. I'm going to double click these two. I think these might be, yeah, not rough enough, apparently. There we go. And let's double click this one. I'm going to pull the refractive index up on that and see what that does. Yeah, it's a little bit too, like, metallic-y. I'm going to pull that down some. Okay, so let's say that that is sufficient. Okay, so that's looking sufficient for right now. Now what I need to do is I need to bring in these textures. So I have inside of Illustrator, you remember I have these textures. And we have black keys here. So if I put black textures on black keys, that's not going to look very good. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take all my text ones and I'm going to set the texture to white. And I'm going to go into this area. And this is a mixture of fills and strokes. So I need to be a little bit more selective. So this is all strokes here. So let's grab these. And let's set this to white here. This is fills and strokes. So this is one of those where I need to select these individual pieces. And select, oops. These pieces, make these white. Okay, now you're not going to be able to see it on here, obviously, because it's white. It's white on white. And let's see, these should be all fills here. Okay, and these have a stroke on them. They don't need to have a stroke on them. There we go. Okay, so now let's save as. Okay, now I need to save this as something I could bring into Keyshot, but I don't see Targa or anything here. Okay, so save as is not going to do it. I need to actually go to export and export out as keyboard, source images, save this as a Targa, hit export, and I'm going to set this to 300 ppi. Yes, I should have saved this one, but again, we'll see once we get into Keyshot. Now on these, let's do these first. So I'm going to double click one of these. So on the properties, we can obviously give this a color here like we were talking about. But if I go to labels, I can actually drop in a label. So I'm going to add a label texture. And there's my keyboard. If I go in the right folder. Yep, there it is. There's my keyboard. Now we'll see if we zoom in. this big long thing right here. Oops, I hit the wrong button. Position, translate, there we go. No, I'm not seeing anything showing up in there. So let's try that again. Let's try, oops. Export. Yep. So I don't want to do Targa. That was my bad. I want to do ping, and I want to use the artboards. There we go. And use number 1. And I should call this keyboard texture. There we go. Okay, so it didn't have the transparency on it. That's why it didn't come in correctly. So now we can go to Keyshot. I'm going to click on the folder here. This is just bringing in the new one. I can delete the old one. There we go. And now we should have a square, which we do. Now I can take the square and resize it and move it around. And because this is showing up on these, you can see them. You know, I assign this texture to those pieces, you can see them coming in. So what I want to do is I want to adjust their position and scale so that they all fit nice and neat. So I may need to shrink this down a bit. I'm going to turn rotate off because I don't need it to rotate. I'm going to grab this so I can move 2 directions at once. Okay, now if I get one of these in position, okay, so let's say the top left one, and I say, okay, well that's good, but these 2 are, you know, too far away. Well, I need to then make this bigger and then slide this over more. Okay, it's pretty close. Let's just slide that over a little bit more. Yeah, that's good. Okay, cool. All right, so that works really well. Let's double click one of these letters. Let's go to our labels. Let's go to here, add label, same texture. Okay, now it's going to do it just to this one, which is kind of funny because it's just so tiny. So we just need to make it bigger. This one's going to be a little bit trickier just because there's a lot more pieces involved in this. So we just have to be patient. Okay, so I can see here, okay, this fits there, good, but then these are too far over. So I'm going to shrink this down and then move it into position. Okay, it's still a little bit too big. Shrink it down a little bit more. Adjust the position again. That seems pretty good. Cool. Okay, now I'm going to hit the OK button here. In this area, we have the label texture. So right now it's coming off as diffuse, so it's just the color. So as we spin around, okay, we'll see those pieces laid out there. You could also go to the properties, and we can choose stuff like roughness. So if we watch the stuff here, you might be able to see it. Sometimes it's a little bit harder to see, but those letters are now rougher. Okay, it's going to be hard to see just because of where they're at. I'm going to double click this one and go to labels, make sure I'm on the label properties here, and we'll see if this, you know, shows a little bit better. Yeah, it's not going to really do it too much because it's white, but that's what it would do. It would change the roughness of just the roughness on here. I could pull the refractive index up some. I could go back to label textures. I could say blend with color. Okay, now this is going to make it black, so if you had stickers or something on here you wanted to have this black texture, look how shiny the sticker is versus the button itself. So that's a way that you can add, you know, that property to it. And now if I go back to label properties and then I take this roughness up, you can see how it then blends it a bit more. Okay, now it's very difficult to see these when they're at this point, so maybe I want to go back and blend it with you know, something a bit more lighter than I had. Right? There's nothing wrong with that. Maybe the white in this one, let's hit OK. The white in these ones is a bit too bright, so let's go to Labels. Let's go to Diffuse. Let's go down to Blend with Color. And then we'll just tone that down a bit. Okay, you could give it color too, like I don't want to for this, but actually I don't mind that blue. I just don't want it so blue. Like a tinge of blue is good. Yeah, that's kind of cool. Right? Now we're also getting this. My environment, we set it to color, but then when I was dropping in my backgrounds, it changed that. So I'm just going to set this back to color. It doesn't change the lighting, it just changes what the actual background is. Okay, now this one is missing something. There's nothing here. I could leave it like that, that's fine. Or I could go into Illustrator, drop something in that area, type it out, and then bring it back in. Okay, I think that's good. I like the way that looks. Okay, now let's say we wanted to add a little bit more light to a piece of this. Okay, so I can go to my HDR, my environment HDRI editor, and if I go over here, this is the add pin, this is the add gradient pin, add image pin, add copy pin, that's eyedropper. Okay, so I'm going to hit add pin, and right now I'm selected on pin number 1. So if I were to click here, it'll actually move the light to that side. If I click on this side, it'll move it to that side. If I click and drag, you can see how it's kind of moving it around all over the place. Okay, so you don't want to click and drag, typically you want to just click. Say I just want to add a little bit more light to this side here. I can click the eyedropper off and on to see what that does. Okay, I like the way that looks. Maybe I want to take the brightness down some on it. Okay, maybe I want to change the blend mode to blend. Maybe that does something more that I want. Maybe I want to change it to alpha or screen. Okay, these are very subtle changes, but they obviously can make a big difference in what we're seeing. I like that definitely a lot better than I did a second ago. I'm going to hit done. And that way I can kind of move around a little bit. You can also turn these lights off, so if you just want to see what a specific light is doing to your environment, you can do that. Here's the background. The background is a solid color. It's like a 20% value. I could boost that up to make the whole thing brighter, or pull it down to make it darker. It's always better when we look at something like this to have value there. So there's nothing in here that is like super dark black that I can't see. Okay, now I'm really not liking the underside of this. I want to see like that one there, that cool pin seems to be filling in the bottom. Yeah. Like that line right there, it just seems like a weird line. Let's double click that, maybe. Alright, let's see some of our other properties. So I'm going to hit this rebuild. Okay, so once we've edited our HDMI, we want to click that to rebuild it. And self shadows, yes. Environment, camera. Make sure we're staying above the ground. Yep. All right, so I think that's pretty good. I think it's good for where we're at with this. I think I'm going to pull that one up. Just not liking how bright that reflection was at the bottom. Maybe whatever this one is, ground fill, I'll just get rid of that. Alright, that seems pretty decent. I like that. Okay, so let's rebuild. Let's go to our settings. Let's take this, pull this up a little bit more. Okay, so that's pretty decent as far as the rendering goes. Like, I'm satisfied with what I'm seeing here. I'm just going to double check some other stuff. Just, again, kind of looking at what the values would do if I just adjusted these a bit more. Okay, it doesn't hurt, especially how quick this is, just to kind of play around with it and see. I think I do want to adjust this label just a smidge. I think I need to move the texture and then just pull this a little bit further that way. And do that. I think it was just off by just that smallest of hairs. So I'm going to hit OK. Cool. All right, so I'm liking, again, the way this is turning out. I do want to test this just to see. Maybe I want to add a splash of color to these as well. So I added the blue. You can also go to color swatches and pick a color from here and use it as kind of a starting point. I think they're too bright if I go, you know, into that other realm here. So. And then you could also use the eyedropper too. Okay, so do we like that? Yeah, that's pretty cool. All right, I like it. All right, so I'm going to go to image, and I'm going to change this setting here. So I'm going to uncheck this link, and I'm going to set this to 960 by 540. And what that's going to do is it's going to crop it so we can see exactly what's in here. Then I'm going to click this link, and I'm going to click this lock. That way it doesn't move. Under photographic here, we'll actually get some different options that we can play with. Okay, so if I wanted to just overall pull up the exposure, I can do that. Adjust my white balance, I can do that. Adjust my contrast. Okay, so it's kind of like, it's imagine if we rendered this and we brought it into Photoshop. These are the things we could do. That's what it's doing. Here's curves, so we can play with curves. So you don't need to play with the individual curve itself, but you could just adjust this. Okay, so brighten the shadows, darken the shadows. And the shadows, we're just talking about darkness and lightness. I want to make the whites brighter, or I want to make the highlights brighter. Okay, we're not really seeing a lot of highlights in the area, but they're there. Okay, so maybe that's good. Let's go down to bloom. Let's take the intensity up. And let's pull this threshold. Yeah, it's hard to see where it's at. There you go, we can kind of see it there. I'm going to punch in, I think, 3, 2. All right, I can go to 2. Right now it's blooming everything, but when I take this bloom threshold up, it'll only bloom the stuff that's the brightest. Okay, and there's not a whole lot that's crazy bright, so we're not seeing a whole lot of bloom. But if we watch here, you'll see a little bit of glow that happens. No bloom, bloom. Okay, so again, it might be something we wanted to add to that. Vignette. Okay, it looks kind of weird too. Our keyboard's kind of floating in space. We'll have to add a ground to this. Chromatic aberration is kind of cool too. If we watch the edges, that's where you're really going to see this. I'm going to pull this aberration strength up. And what this does is it'll help separate the colors a bit so that they're not like perfectly lined up with each other. I'm not seeing any huge change there. Yeah, there we can see it. Okay, so let's go into caps lock here. And it's one of those things where you have to see it at a specific angle. So if you look right there, we turn this off, turn this on, you can see how it's just shifting the colors very slightly. Okay, it gives it a cool, like, technological look. Okay, and these small changes make a huge difference. Okay, so again, I'm liking what we're seeing here, just kind of adjusting, playing with some of these colors. We could again adjust these afterwards too, like adding the vignette and all that. But I like to see what they're looking like here. Some of them you can't do as easily, like the bloom or the chromatic aberration, but the other ones you can. Cool. So let's add a ground real quick. So I'm going to go to models. I'm going to add a plane. Okay, and right now the plane is very tiny, so let's go to scene. Let's find the plane, and let's scale this up to like 100 or something. Okay, let's snap it to the ground. Alright, well I snapped that to the ground, but it didn't seem like it snapped it to the ground. Let's make sure this is snapped to the ground. There we go. So our keyboard wasn't snapped to the ground. Cool. Okay, now this default one comes in obviously blue. I'm going to go to my materials, and I'm going to find some, let's hit OK on this. I don't want to move this. Let's just see what this is. Textured plastic. Let's drag that. Okay, so that's pretty cool. So now you can see we get a line way back here, but if we only focus on where we see it without that line, this is going to look a lot nicer. We're going to get some nice reflection happening here. So it doesn't really feel like we're floating in space. Oh, look at that chromatic aberration happening on this side. See a little bit of red right there. Nice. Okay. Now another thing I like to do, okay, let's say I want to have a camera angle like this, and I don't want to see that line. What I'm going to do is I'm going to add a fade to this. So on my plane, on my material for the plane, okay, these are all the materials, so I can just double click. I'm going to go to textures, and one of the textures is opacity. So I'm going to right click on that, go to textures, and inside here I'm going to add a color gradient. Okay, now on this color gradient, I'm going to double click. I'm going to make sure this is set to, it should be work for color. I'm going to drag this back just to verify. Yep. Okay, so you can see as I drag the black, it's like hiding that part. Keyshot wants me to save, so let me just save real quick. I'm going to save this not as a package, but as just a regular file. And again, putting it into that same folder here. Keyboard, Keyshot. Okay, so this is basically giving us some gradation. Okay, I'm going to change it from planar to angular. Okay, if we come up here, you can see where it's angular as I drag this. It does that. Okay, so that's not it. Is it spherical? I think it's spherical is what I want. Yep, there it is. You can see how it's kind of dropping off that gradation. Now I'm going to move the texture so it's a little bit more aligned with my shape here. And I'm going to even take this plane and make it even bigger. I think it's just still too small. So I'm going to go 500. And that gives me just a little bit more wiggle room to like push this out further. There we go. Cool. Alright, that definitely needs to be centered better too. Okay. So now when we're here and we see this, we get this nice softer blended line. Okay, because it's basically creating a mask on top of that thing. Let's double click the ground. Let's take the roughness down. Okay, so now we have this. We can have a nice crisp reflection if we wanted. Pull that roughness up, blur it a bit more. Okay, so I think that's good for the materials, for the lighting and stuff like that. This is good. Next, we'll work on giving it some animation and then rendering it out.